Okay, so drenaLINE splice. To start off, just if you've got a sealed rope end, you just want to cut that off. And then I'm going to make a series of marks on the cover. So mark A, that's 70 centimeters from the rope end. Mark B, 78 centimeters from the rope end. So this section here from A is what we're going to taper in order to back splice, and A to B is the size of the eye. Then we've got mark C, which is 108 centimeters from the rope end, and D here, which is 120. So this section between C and D is where we're going to cross over elements which are going in opposite directions. So we want this to be as smooth, as consistent diameter as possible. And since I've got my pen out, I'm going to mark the cover for tapering. So working from mark A towards the rope end, I'm going to count 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I'm going to mark one strand in each direction. And from there, we're going to count 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So 10 strands in total. It's 5 in each direction, and it's 8, 3, 4, 3, 3. And then you just want to put a stopper knot in. You don't want it too close to mark D, so I'll give it like an arm's length. Nice secure knot to keep the cores in place, like so. And the first thing I'm going to do here is just go to mark C, and here we're going to remove some cores. So I've got parallel core rope, and there's 9 cores in total. At mark C, I'm going to take out 5, and the way I do this is to take a Selma fid, and I just loosen the braid a little bit. Just take care that you don't split any cover strands. So you're going to go in towards the rope end at an angle, like so. And then if you just work with the fid there, pull it up, you'll see that you get one core coming up. And then just work with that core. So you just have to manage the cover there just to be able to pull that core out. And once you've got the first one out, it becomes much easier. So just taking care as well, only to pull from the rope end and not from this section here towards mark D. So once I've got one, I can just go in with the fid there and make that hole a little bit bigger, and then you're going to take out 4 more. So personally, I'd recommend just taking out 1 core at a time. It is possible to pull out several at once, but then what can happen is some of those remaining 4 cores which you want to stay in position might get sort of pulled out of alignment. So I think it's safer really to just take 1 at a time. And here I've also pulled out the annual manufacturer tracer and the rope ID tracer, so it doesn't really matter if these come out at this point or later on during the splice. Sometimes they don't come out at all. You're unlikely to run into any issues with the traces. So, got 5 cores there coming out at mark C. And what I'm going to do now is also taper the cover. So I'm going to cut and pull my 10 mark strands. Now the way I do this on drenaLINE is I like to cut them first and then pull, and that's because we've got a high strand count in the cover and also a long section from A to the rope end, and that means there's a lot of friction on individual cover strands. So it is possible to pull them first and cut them, but just out of preference I choose to cut them first. So starting closest to the rope end, we just go in with the scissors, pull up and then cut like so. And then I've also eliminated the risk of pulling from beyond mark A as well. So cut out all my 10 strands there, and that's started to taper this section from A towards the rope end. And now what we're going to do is mark this section and pull out the 4 remaining cores. So I'm just going to measure here from mark A towards the rope end and make 4 marks. So I'm going to mark at 10, 16, 22 and 28. And at each of those marks I'm going to pull out 1 core. So again, just with the fid, go in and bend up there. These 4 should be quite easy to remove. So what we've got here is a continuation of the taper within this section. So these 4 cores will eventually be cut off, but for now we need to keep them in place to help us pull the cover through. So the next step is to backsplice the cover end, but before we can do that we need to just make a check. So what we want is for the cores which are still inside the cover to be lying in the correct position. So if you imagine that when the rope is in balance, the cores will sit parallel, something like this. And when the slack gets introduced into the cover, these cores can also become slack. And then when you milk the cover again, we might find is you get twisting, and if 1 core is traveling in this direction, it's going to create a bump. So I'm going to make a check, try to visualize what's happening inside the rope, but I'm milking from the anchor knot towards the rope end, feeling and just trying to push those cores back into alignment. So if you do feel a bump, what you can do is just roll the rope a bit, work with the cover and try and get that core back into where it's supposed to be. Something like this. And if you're still struggling, it can help to just pull on these 4 cores a little and then just milk again all the way from the knot. Until you're happy that the cores are sitting where they're supposed to be. Now I'm going to pull the cover end through, and that's going to start to form the eye. So it's going to go in at mark B and come out at mark D. And so to do this, you're going to need a wire fid at least 50 centimeters, and I'll explain why. And the stiffer the better, really, it just makes it easier. So if we find mark D and just rotate the rope, loosen the cover a little, and the wire goes in. So just take care not to split any cover strands here as well, just goes between the braid. And now there's quite a high volume of material in this section, so what can help is if you just pull the cores at mark C just ever so gently. And that's given us a little bit of slack to work with. So it's good to keep the rope in this position, let the cover end hang down, and now again just try and visualize what's happening inside the rope. So the wire needs to stay in that space just underneath the inside of the cover, and make sure that it doesn't cross over any of the cores. So keep this hand quite relaxed, and you can push firmly with the second hand. So this hand is really just to feel, don't be pulling the cover here, just feeling with the thumb, make sure that the end of the wire stays in position. And here, when we get to mark B, I'm just going to pop that out opposite mark B. So again, just make a check that we're not splitting any cover strands. There we go. So here, and this is why you need a 50 centimeter fid. If you have a short fid, you get a lot of bunching of the cover within this section, and that increases the risk of everything coming out of balance. So it's possible to do without, but just as a tip, we put the wire in like so, and then make some effort to reduce twisting of the cover. And put the cover end in. So I'm going to pull this through in a couple of steps. Firstly, I'm just going to pull the cover end in, and then I'm going to make a check. So I've just pulled my cover end in about 30 millimeters, and then I'm going to make a check. So I'm just going to take hold of my 4 cores and just give them a pull. You should feel some movement. Now, I then attach the wire back onto the anchor, and I'm going to take all 9 cores together, just wrap on the hand, and if I just give that a pull, you should see that the cover end is starting to move into the rope. Now when it gets to mark C, you might find that you need to give it a bit of a hand just to get through the last section, but keep that tension on the 9 cores. There we go. So, started to form the eye, and got the cover tail coming out at mark D, 5 cores coming out at mark C. You'll see that quite a lot of cover slack has accumulated in this section. The first thing to do is just tie a knot in the cover end, and that wants to be as close to the end as possible, and that's going to give us enough slack to work with. And then you need to get yourself some kind of loop. So what you can do if you don't have anything is just take one of your cores from mark C, and I'm just going to cut off about, what's that, 20 centimeters or so. And this won't affect the splice. So I just made a small loop, like so, and that goes on to the cover end with a girth hitch. Then if you pull the cover from mark B just until that knot on your loop sits at mark D, and that's going to give us enough slack to work with. So what's quite important here is to milk this extra cover slack all the way back from the anchor point back towards the rope end. So do this a few times, milking that slack all the way, and then up from mark C to B. Here you should get an idea of whether you've crossed over any cores when you've backspliced the cover. This should be nice and smooth and no bumps. And then I work around the eye like so, milking the slack over those exposed core ends. So it's quite important here to milk the slack not only from mark D, but all the way from the anchor, since we get quite a lot of accumulated slack beyond mark D. The next step is to complete the eye. So we need to cut off the exposed cores within the eye, and then using this loop we're going to pull the cover through. So as long as you're happy with you've milked enough slack from the cover, you don't need to mark these cores for cutting, you can just cut them by eye. So milk the slack, pull slightly, and just cut, and make sure that that cut tail disappears within the rope, and then on to the next one. And again. So this taper is what's going to allow us to firstly pull the splice, pull the cover through, but also that tapering will give strength to the splice and hold it all in place when it's finished. So just put a carabiner on the eye, and then to pull this through you want to maintain quite a bit of tension on this carabiner, and the loop on the end of your cover goes onto your fixed anchor. And then just maintaining tension, pulling from mark D and milking that slack over the eye. So just do it gradually. You don't want to be pulling all the slack down and then pulling the eye through, because again you're going to unbalance the cores. So keep working with the slack and you want to pull that until mark A goes beyond mark B. So you really want the eye to be tight around a carabiner. So we don't want any risk of cross-loading this splice. We don't want to be able to get two carabiners in there. And because of the nature of the splice, it's just the back splice. So if we get cross-loading here, there is a risk that the compression will become distorted and uneven, and potentially the eye could pull out. So spend some time to milk the slack and the cover. We're going to pull back from the eye and also milk the slack in the opposite direction. You want to do that 2 or 3 times. It's quite important that that's done correctly. If you don't milk enough slack, what you'll find is when you try to finish the splice, often the eye will pull out because there's not enough compression. So that's from under milking. Now what we've got is the core tail coming out at mark D, 5 cores coming out at C, and then slight tapering between C and B, and a nice tight eye. So the last step is to work with these exposed tails to make a taper and then pull these back in. So this needs to be done quite systematically. First we're going to mark both the cores and the cover at the exit point. Then I'm going to pull slack from the cores, mark and taper, then pull slack from the cover, mark and taper, and then pull the cut tails back in. If you cut the cores and pull them back in first, often they'll pull out of alignment when you go to work with the tail. So we don't pull anything back in until the tapering is finished. So start with a mark there at D and also at C. It's quite important here not to pull too much slack from these cores. So you need about 120 millimeters, and you can pull about 150 maximum. Let's have a look here, a little bit more. If you pull too much at this stage, then what you'll probably find is the tails will not pull back in, no matter how much slack you milk from the cover. The core tails just don't go back into alignment if you pull them out too far. So just get rid of my tracers now. And firstly, I'm just going to take one core and put that to the side. That's not getting cut at this step. And so starting at your marking, I'm working away from the rope end. I'm just going to make a mark on each core, and that's going to be every 30 millimeters. So starting at 30, 60, 90 and 120. So you can see that, and I'm also going to cut these as well. So that's the tapering on the core tail. Then go to the cover, pull it out as much as you can. Should give you about 100 millimeters of slack. So I make a horizontal cut at the marking, and then I'm going to split the braid. So in order to get this section nice and consistent on the diameter, it's important not to cut off too much from this cover tail. I'd recommend, if you fan it, to cut about 40 millimeters. So there isn't a measurement in the instructions for this cut, and that's because it can be quite different depending on how thorough you've been with milking the slack, and also differences between batches of rope and that kind of thing. So if you've milked the slack correctly, you should find that about 40 millimeters is correct, but you might need to adjust that measurement, but you'll feel it when we finish the splice. So the last step is simply to pull these back into the rope. So here I'm just going to pinch the rope at the throat and just milk that cover slack and see that the core tails go back in. And also pull in the opposite direction just to see that the cover tail also goes in. Okay. So almost there. We've just got one core coming out at mark C, and if you're happy with the milking of the slack, you're just going to cut that off at its exit point, like so. So again, no measurement on this core. You'll see that I didn't cut it off at the original exit point, that I ended up with about 25 millimeters of extra there. So again, that's to do with how much we milk the slack and the angle on our taper and stuff. So there's a bit of margin been left for that one. Sometimes it gets cut off at the mark and sometimes not. So that's it. We can just make a visual check there that the eye size is correct, tight on the carabiner, and then we want a nice smooth taper between mark B and C. The total taper is about 2 millimeters, and then between C and D, just feeling that should be nice and smooth diameter, no lumps or bumps. So just remembering, of course, to do a whipping on this splice to hold it in place. So that's 1 millimeter Dyneema twine, whipping depth of about 1 centimeter, and that's going in between 60 and 50 millimeters from mark B.